Culture has been found to influence the way you want to feel. Hi, it's Bradley again, hosting another Diverse Voices themed episode of the Psych Everywhere podcast. As you might know, this series is brought to you by Psi Chi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. So today, let's feature one of Psi Chi's many really amazing distinguished lecturers who speak at regional and national conventions each year. On the phone, I've got Dr. Jeanne Tsai from Stanford University. Dr. Tsai is Psi Chi's distinguished lecturer at the 2019 Association for Psychological Science Convention, that's APS, in May. Today, she's going to talk to us about the many ways that our culture can influence our ideal affect, which is sort of like the ideal state that people want to feel. Happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust. There are a lot of emotions out there, but I'm sure they're all exciting to talk about, especially with Dr. Tsai. So let's hear what she has to say, starting with her own definition of what ideal affect really is, and how your ideal affect, i.e. the way you want to feel, is different from how you actually feel.
Yes, ideal affect refers to the emotions and feelings that people value and ideally want to feel. And sometimes people are aware of their ideal affect, but many times they're not. They're behaving in lots of ways and making lots of decisions and doing things that are a function of how they want to feel. And sometimes they know that, sometimes they don't.
Okay. And what are some different ideal affects that have been influenced by culture?
Well, most of our research has really focused on the ideal positive states that people have, so the degree to which people want to feel different positive states. We focus primarily on how much people want to feel excited, enthusiastic, energetic, what we call these high arousal positive states, as well as the degree to which people want to feel calm, peaceful, and serene, what we call low arousal positive states. And what we find is that in the United States, there's such an emphasis on these high arousal positive states. People want to feel excited, enthusiastic, passionate about what they do and who they love. Whereas in many East Asian contexts, including Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, China, there's more of an emphasis on the low arousal positive states, feeling calm, peaceful, and serene. And I think one thing that's really different that I should say about ideal affect is that it often gets confused with how people actually feel. In a lot of the psych literature, there's been so much focus on how people actually feel, but how people want to feel, we've shown, is different from how people actually feel. And so that even across cultural contexts, everybody feels excitement and calm at some time, but the degree to which people want to feel those states seems to really vary by culture.
Okay.
We've also looked at different negative states, how much people want to avoid negative feelings. For example, we find that in the United States, people really want to avoid feeling bad, whether it's anger or sadness. But in European contexts, like in Germany, there's much more acceptance of negative emotions. And then we've also looked at things like the relative value placed on positive versus negative states. In the United States, there's such an emphasis on feeling good and feeling positive. In fact, feeling good means you don't feel bad. So if you look at the relative emphasis on positive and negative states, in the U.S., there's just much more emphasis on positive than negative states. But in other contexts, like East Asian contexts, there's more of an emphasis on the balance of positive and negative states, so that even though people want to feel positive more than negative, there's less of a discrepancy between the two. They want to feel positive, but they also want to feel more negative than in U.S. contexts. So we've looked at a number of different positive states and also some negative states, and then even the relative value placed on positive versus negative states, and found that they all vary by culture.
You're listening to Psych Everywhere. In just a moment, Dr. Tsai is going to take us through an example of how she goes about testing culture and its influence on affect. But first, who is this wonderfully informative Dr. Jeanne Tsai? Dr. Tsai is currently Professor of Psychology in the Department of Psychology at Stanford University and the Director of the Stanford Culture and Emotion Lab. She received her bachelor's in psychology from Stanford and her PhD in clinical psychology from UC Berkeley. Her research examines the cultural shaping of emotion and its implications on things like health, decision-making, and person perception. Her work is currently funded by the National Science Foundation and has been funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, the National Institute on Aging, and the National Alliance for Research on Schizophrenia and Depression. She was associate editor of the journal called Emotion from 2015 to 2017. She's a fellow of the Association for Psychological Science, the American Psychological Association Division 8, the Society for Personality and Social Psychology, and the Society for Experimental Social Psychology. Oh, and she's a Psi Chi member too. At Stanford, she has received the Dean's Award for Distinguished Teaching and the Asian American Activities Center Faculty Award. Her work has been described in various national news outlets including Psychology Today, World Economic Forum, Harvard Business Review, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post. And of course, she's also been featured on this new podcast brought to you by Psi Chi, and that sounds like a lot to be proud of to me. For this interview, I was seated in my office in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which overlooks the Tennessee River, and Dr. Tsai was in her office in California. As she puts it,
I see lots of books and lots of unopened magazines that I need to open, and lots of papers that I'd like to clean once the quarter's over, or piles that I'd like to sort through. But and I'm looking at my computer, but I'm also looking at my favorite Mark Rothko painting on my wall, and it's really beautiful outside. It's lots of green trees, and it's sunny California weather. So overall, it's a good site.
Okay, I'm kind of interested in this, in how you actually go about testing culture and its influence on affect. Could you take us through one of your study procedures?
Sure. I it's such a big question because, of course, this has been one of the primary focuses of our research, is really to understand how does culture influence emotion. And I think there are a number of things that we learned over the years, and a number of ways in which we kept asking ourselves, well, how do we know this is culture? How do we know this is culture? So the first way we tried to really look at cultural differences in ideal affect was to create a measure of ideal affect and add it to the existing measures of actual affect, or how people are actually feeling. So we created a survey where we just asked people, how much do you actually feel these states on average, which is consistent with a lot of emotion measures. But then in addition, we asked them, well, how much would you ideally like to feel these states, on average or over the course of a typical week? And then we just administered these questionnaires to people from different cultural contexts, particularly the ones that we've been interested in and focused on: European Americans living in the United States, and then Hong Kong Chinese, Taiwanese, and other East Asians living in other contexts. And then we've just, looked at how people responded to these surveys and found that European Americans value these excitement states, these high arousal positive states, more than Hong Kong Chinese, and Hong Kong Chinese value the calm states more than their European American counterparts. And what's important is that these differences in ideal affect exist against a backdrop of no differences, or very few differences, in how much people are reporting actually feeling those states. So that was the first evidence that maybe culture might be influencing how people want to feel even more than how they actually feel. And then we also administered different measures of influence and adjustment values, and found that those were related to valuing the excitement and calm states in the ways that we predicted. But then to really make sure that this is really due to culture, we started thinking, well, if this is really cultural, we should be able to identify the ways in which people actually learn to value certain states over others by looking at the kinds of media that they're exposed to. Mm-hmm. So we did studies looking at best-selling children's storybooks, looking at, best-selling women's magazines, looking at, the kinds of photos that people put on social media, and even the kinds of smiles that leaders show in their official website photos. And we find that U.S. Media has much more excitement content than East Asian media or Chinese media. So like in best-selling American children's storybooks, the characters are more likely to show excited expressions on their faces, these open, toothy, excited smiles, than are characters in best-selling Taiwanese children's storybooks. In U.S. Women's magazines, there are many more excited expressions and fewer calm expressions than in Chinese women's magazines. And then in the official website photos, we found that U.S. leaders, regardless of their domain, if they're in government, business, or even in academia, U.S. leaders are like 6 times more likely to show these open, toothy, excited smiles than their Chinese counterparts. We've also looked at children, so we thought that, we should, since people become cultural beings from really early on in life, we should find that kids around preschool age, when they're just beginning to develop, understand certain beliefs about emotion, they should also reveal these differences in ideal affect. So we compared European American preschoolers with Taiwanese preschoolers, and we couldn't give them our regular self-report measures, so we just showed them an excited face, smiley face, and a calm smiley face, and we asked them which one they would prefer to be, and we found that the European American preschoolers were more likely to choose the excited smiley face than the Taiwanese preschoolers. In all of these studies, we've been also, in an attempt to make sure this is cultural, we've also tried to control or consider alternative hypotheses. So, in culture and emotion research, the biggest alternative hypothesis is that these differences would be due to temperament. And so in the kids study, we actually asked the teachers of all the kids to rate the kids' temperament. And so we controlled for that in our analyses, and we found that there were actually few differences in temperament between the European American kids in the U.S. and the Taiwanese kids in Taiwan. But even when we controlled for those, we still found these differences in the emotional states that they preferred to be or that they associated with happiness. So that's another way in which we've tried to show that this is really cultural by controlling for temperamental factors, which we think should also influence emotion. So that's how we've gone about testing culture's influence on ideal affect. And then the studies that I told you about linking, individuals to goals with the value placed on excitement and more collectivistic goals with the value placed on calm.
Okay, so now that we have this information, I was wondering, what do we do with it? How do we use this information about how culture is influencing happiness?
Well, I think it's really, I think it's important for lots of different reasons. I think these cultural differences in ideal affect play a role in many different aspects of everyday life. So we've done some studies showing that ideal affect, or how people want to feel, influences the types of behaviors they engage in. So the more people value excitement, the more likely they are to engage in really physically rigorous activity, and like running versus walking. We've also shown that it predicts the kinds of consumer products people choose. So in some studies, we give the people choices between like stimulating lotion versus soothing lotion, or stimulating teas like the Awake Tazo tea versus the more soothing or calming chamomile tea or Zen tea. And we find, again, that the more people value excitement states, the more likely they are to choose the more stimulating consumer products. And as you suggested, we've looked at how this plays itself out in conceptions of happiness and well-being, so that the more people value excitement states, the more likely they are to think of happiness as being excited and elated and or depression as the absence of excitement and elation. And then most recently, we've shown how it's related to even how we perceive other people. So we have a number of studies showing that the more people value excitement, the more likely they are to see somebody who's excited as warm and friendly and affiliative. And so we're calling this like an ideal affect match. When you show somebody who's showing the emotions that you value, you rate them as more warm and friendly and trustworthy and affiliative. And then in turn, you're more likely to share resources with them. You're even more likely to hire them for a job. So I think that these differences, both individual and cultural differences in ideal affect, play a large role in people's everyday lives and what they're doing to feel good and how they're defining what it means to be healthy and happy, and even, how they're responding to other people and who they're ultimately, choosing to share resources with. So in all those studies, we find, that European Americans are more likely to choose exciting products, even physicians who focus on excitement, to define happiness in terms of excitement. Oh, we even have a study showing that the more people value excitement, the more they dread old age because they associate old age with, sort of a less arousal. And so So it's just, this is all research that's showing how people's either conscious or unconscious emotional values shape all these things that they do and all these things that they believe. And we think it's important for a number of reasons. I mean, one is that because we live in a multicultural society, the cultural differences in ideal affect can play themselves out in a variety of ways that lead to cultural misunderstandings. So, for example, oftentimes Asian Americans who value calm states are viewed as reserved and as stoic, even as being disengaged. But they may just be showing the calm states that their culture teaches them to value. But through the lens of European American eyes that really value excitement, they seem reserved and quiet and disengaged. So there can be a lot of these cultural differences in ideal affect can lead to, I think, a lot of interpersonal misunderstandings. And so because we're coming in contact with people who are coming from lots of different cultures, I think it's really important to know that, maybe that person it's not that they're untrustworthy or unfriendly. They are just showing their warmth and friendliness in a different way that's valued by their culture. I think also it's possible that individuals get kind of stuck in the ideal affect of their culture. So it's like in the U.S., in some studies, we've asked people, when was the last time you felt excited? When was the last time that you felt calm? And what's just striking to us is that the excitement descriptions are often about things that take a long time to achieve, and they occur pretty rarely, like winning a national competition or finally going on that date with that person that I've had a crush on for so long. Whereas the calm descriptions seem to be about things that happen on a daily basis, or that could happen on a daily basis, like going on a walk or reading a book. And so I think if you start defining your happiness only in terms of one way, then it might be harder to achieve that happiness, especially if the happiness that you seek is really about this rare form of excitement. If you could have a view of happiness that was more about everyday calm, maybe you'd be happier in your daily lives. So I think this work is also important because it shows that if you know that there's a diversity of ways that you could ideally want to feel, you could have more of like a more diverse happiness portfolio in some ways. And you could not be stuck in sort of one type of happiness. You could see that people can can feel happy in different ways, and that they do across cultures. And maybe then that would bring more happiness to people's everyday lives. So those are just some ways in which I think these cultural differences and individual differences in ideal affect matter.
Okay. Well, I have to ask. So between excitement or seeking calmness, which is better? In other words, is one of these two more achievable, or do people who seek one of the two generally report being more satisfied with their lives?
See, I think this is a really good question. In our early work, we looked at the links to depression, and what we found was that across the cultures, the greater the discrepancy between how you're actually feeling and how you ideally want to feel, the more depressed you are. That was true across cultures. But what was interesting was that the type of discrepancy that predicted depression differed across the cultures. So in the European American context, it was really the discrepancy in the excitement states that led to that were associated with more depression. In Hong Kong, it was the discrepancy in the calm states that was associated with more depression. And for our Chinese Americans who are oriented to both cultures, it was the discrepancy in both states that were associated with depression. So across the cultures, the greater the discrepancy between the ideal affects, the more depressed they were, but it was sort of defined by the culture which type of discrepancy mattered more. But like I said, I don't really know if there's one type. It's a complicated question whether people are happier in one culture than another, because the basis of happiness is different, across cultures. But I think that we could benefit from the cross-cultural work by broadening, our definitions of happiness. And if these descriptions of excitement and calm tell us anything, it's that maybe the type of happiness that you can experience on a more daily basis, maybe you would be happier because you could experience it more in your daily life. Mm-hmm. So that, it's kind of a complicated way of answering that question, but it's hard to say that one is better than the other because that depends on the culture that you're in.
Right. So say that I have an ideal affect for excitement. If I experience something that's very calming, will that be less satisfying for me, or?
Yeah, so what we found is that's a really good question. What we found is that for people who value calm, when they engage in calming activities, they derive more enjoyment. So the more they value calm, the more enjoyable the calming activity is, whether it's like low intensity exercise or it's, a merry-go-round ride on an amusement park. Those are the types of calming activities we've looked at. But for excitement, it's been harder to get people to feel the amount of excitement that they want to feel in the lab or in the field. So in those studies, we had people engage in high intensity exercise. That didn't make them feel the excitement they wanted to feel. We even had them go on these free fall amusement park rides. That didn't capture the excitement that they wanted to feel. So we don't know. There's something about excitement. It's hard to capture again, and maybe it's because it requires a lot of achievement or a lot of investment before you can really feel that excitement. There's some data not from our lab that showed that people who really care about doing well on a test exam, they seem to, the more they value excitement, if they get a good grade, the happier they are. So that's kind of consistent with that idea. But it didn't seem like the more that people valued excitement, the less enjoyable. We couldn't find a relationship between how much they valued excitement and how enjoyable they found the exciting activity, in part, we think, because the activity just didn't elicit as much excitement for them. So we're still trying to answer that question by trying to figure out what is the best way to get at people's excitement, either in the lab or in the field. But it's true for calm. The more you value calm, the more enjoyable you find a calming activity.
Oh, okay. So I know people sometimes need to work on changing like their ideal weight, right? Because that can be, unachievable and can lead to disappointment. do you think there are reasons why some people should also want to change their ideal affect? And is that possible?
Yes, I've talked to a number of clinicians who've talked about that being what they do in therapy, and they've talked about it in terms of acceptance therapy too. Mm-hmm. Some clinicians have told me that they've had patients or clients who seemed satisfied, but they just felt like it wasn't enough, that they were supposed to be passionate and excited about what they wanted to do, and they didn't feel that. They weren't necessarily feeling distressed, but they weren't feeling that excitement, and that the clinicians that I talked to said that maybe they thought they were trying to get them to just accept the satisfied feeling that they had. And I do think that we can be trapped by our ideals. That sounds so awful from an American perspective, because we're all about hope and optimism and striving to be more and more and more. And I think that striving is important to some degree, but I also think that sometimes it's good to just value what you have, and that for the client or the patient who's trying to feel so much excitement, they're getting that from the culture, that that's the right way to feel, but that doesn't mean there aren't other right ways to feel as well. I mean, it's interesting, Eric Weiner wrote about this in his book, The Geography of Bliss, about these hedonic refugees. This is, more anecdotal, but he was talking about people who went to different parts of the world because they felt better in them. And he didn't articulate it this way specifically, but I always think of that as, people going to the culture or the environment that's valuing the state that they feel more. And maybe that's when you sort of feel like there's a good fit between you and the place that you're living in. Either it's a place that matches how you're actually feeling or values the same states that you value. So I do think that there is utility in again, broadening how you want to feel, and not getting stuck in just feeling one way, but recognizing that we feel so many different states, including negative emotions too. I think that in the U.S., if we have this idea that we should be happy all the time, that's just not life. Life is just full of both positive and negative feelings. And so if we have this idea that you can't feel negative, or that feeling negative means you're not feeling good, then you're kind of in trouble, because life is just full of positive and negative events, if not your own events, other people around you who are experiencing good and bad things. That's just life. So I do think you can change, and that's partly why we're doing this work, to show that if in other cultures there's more acceptance of negative affect, or there's more valuation on calm states, then other people can feel those endorse those values as well. And we know, we've done some work showing that this is really important when we're teaching clinicians to accurately assess the emotions of their clients, that oftentimes, what we found in our studies is that American clinicians use a lack of excitement to assess depression. But if we teach them about these cultural differences in ideal affect, they rely on that less. They realize that, well, maybe excitement is not the only way, or the lack of excitement isn't the only way in which people might be expressing depression or emotional distress. So they kind of are, broad in sort of how they view happiness. And so they rely less on the absence of excitement when diagnosing depression, and they think of the absence of calm as well. So it's not just changing how people want to feel themselves, but also maybe changing how other people think of happiness more generally. And that might make people more accurately recognize, the emotional states of the people around them, particularly people who are coming from different cultures than their own.
Very interesting. So the next time I see Mona Lisa, I'll think, well, maybe she's really happy.
Yeah, maybe she just values calm, right?
Yeah. So how did you become interested in this area of research?
I have always been, ever since I was an undergrad, I've been interested in culture. My parents are Taiwanese immigrants, and so I was raised in two cultures, sort of Taiwanese culture at home and U.S. culture outside of the home. And so when I came to Stanford as an undergrad, I started taking psychology classes, and a lot of the theories that I learned at the time, they didn't really ring true for my family. And then there was very little research on non-Western samples, and what there was seemed wrong to me. I mean, there was just, again, there were these stereotypes of Asians as being stoic and reserved and always controlling their emotions, and that just never seemed to really accurately describe my family. So that's how I became interested in understanding really how does culture influence emotion. And again, what our studies have shown is that culture really seems to influence how we want to feel and what emotions we value even more than how we're actually feeling. And so that's how some things can seem really the same, similar, but also you can see differences as well. And what our work is sort of suggesting is that there seem to be more, their culture influences both how we want to feel and how we actually feel. But it seems like the influence that culture has on our emotions is greater in terms of how we want to feel and what emotions we think are good. Because there's so many other things that also influence how we're actually feeling. So that's how I became interested in the work.
Okay. Well, what would you like to accomplish next? Are there more questions that you're looking to answer?
Yes, we've been doing some work in collaboration with Brian Knutson, and I should say all of this work is such a team effort. I mean, there's just so many past and present and members of the Stanford Culture and Emotion Lab are responsible for all of these studies. We've been doing some work with Brian Knutson looking at the neural mechanisms that might explain why we view people whose emotional expressions match our ideal affect more positively, why we think they're more warm and friendly. And what we're finding is that when we see somebody whose emotions match our ideal affect, we just find them more rewarding. And this is indicated by increased activity in the ventral striatum. And our studies suggest that it's not that we identify with those faces more. It's not that they elicit less negative emotion. It really seems to be that those emotional expressions that match our ideal affect just make us want to interact with them more. And so one direction we're going is again looking at some of the neural mechanisms involved in these processes, and we're continuing to look at how these differences matter for things like who we choose as leaders. And most recently, we have a National Science Foundation grant that is focused on the moderators or the factors that or the conditions under which we're more likely to find that ideal affect matters, or the conditions under which they matter less. So, for example, I said that we have a lot of data showing that European Americans are more likely to give or share resources to excited versus calm targets or recipients. This is using these behavioral economic games like the dictator game. And so one of our questions is, well, are they more likely to do that when they're given more time to deliberate? So this is work by Elizabeth Blevins in my lab, and she finds that when we give people more time to deliberate, they're less likely to give resources. European Americans are less likely to give more resources to excited versus calm recipients. Instead, they're more likely to just give equally to excited and calm recipients. What's really interesting is that we've also done this, of course, in China. And in China, again, people give more to calm versus excited targets, consistent with their ideal affect. But what's interesting is deliberation doesn't seem to change that. So that's one direction we're interested in, moderators. Another one is like reputation. If somebody has a really good reputation, but they're showing an expression that doesn't match our ideal affect, what are we influenced by more when we're deciding whether or not to share resources with them. So that's another direction. In addition to looking at some of the neural mechanisms, we're interested in some of the moderators or the factors that increase or decrease the degree to which ideal affect match influences our decisions.
Okay. So that's about all I had. I thought I'd end off on sort of a fun one. So could you describe a situation that you think would put you in your ideal affect?
So we're planning our summer vacation, and I think being on a Hawaiian beach would put me in a very calm, relaxing state, which is how I want to feel right now. But of course, I can think of situations where, when that would make me feel a lot of the excitement that I want to feel as well. So at another time, I'd be, really want to go on a big hike and do more physically rigorous sort of energizing kinds of activities. But right now I'm thinking about that calm vacation on the beach.
Well, that sounds great to me. I'll see you there.
Yeah, right.
So did you have anything at all that you'd like to add?
I guess the thing that I didn't mention that I'd like to mention too is that, we've been talking about how European Americans or people from contexts that value excitement view people who value calm or who are expressing calm. But the flip also is true too, that a lot of times in contexts that value excitement states less, they view Americans as kind of goofy with their big, broad, toothy Julia Roberts smile. And when we published this paper looking at the leaders that I mentioned earlier, what really was funny was the headlines in the Chinese newspapers. They said things like, why American leaders' smiles are so exaggerated. And in another, in a much older study done by another research team, they found that Chinese thought that excited smiles, they didn't like excited targets because they seemed so impulsive and unpredictable. So, the misunderstandings go both ways.
Special thanks to Dr. Tsai for speaking with us today. And thank you, too, for tuning in to this episode of Psych Everywhere. If you have the chance, please take a moment to leave a quick review for this episode on Apple Podcasts. This will help us to grow the podcast and make it even better. Plus, I'm hoping to take a few minutes to read a few of these reviews in a future episode of the series. Would you like to meet experts like Dr. Tsai in person and learn more about their research? If so, I've got a great opportunity for you. Psi Chi offers all sorts of engaging educational content at the regional and national conventions. We're talking workshops on career advancement in graduate school, invited diversity speakers, poster sessions, and of course the distinguished lecturers like Dr. Tsai. To see our upcoming convention programs, simply hop on over to the Psi Chi website, that's psichi.org, and select the Conventions tab in the main menu bar. Okay, that's all for now. Talk to you again soon. Copyright 2019, Psi Chi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved.